Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'll be talking about Ways of Seeing by John Berger. This is the third book that I finished this year on my quest to read more about art criticism, creativity, craft, etc. I believe this book was originally a TV show, maybe, and the ideas and essays got condensed into a book. This is kind of a classic in the world of the arts, and I remember when I was at uni, this was on the list of recommended reading, even though it was written in the 70s. And I would say that it does feel like it still has relevance today. However, I think it could do with some updating. Going into this, I was a little bit skeptical because it is a book from the 70s written by 5 white dudes, and I just feel like there's going to be some blind spots there when you're talking in such broad terms as ways of seeing, as though this is some universal thing. And even though within the book they're trying essentially to have you look at the different perspectives, they broadly, culturally have the same perspective. So I think that already is kind of a built-in flaw to how they've constructed this. I think it would have been great if they had perspectives from people from other cultures, and especially from some women even. But I suppose as far as the Western perspective goes, this is looking at Western artwork, well, Western European, Western in a certain context. It's not looking at like Western as in the Americas. Even though there are essays that talk about women in art, I feel like they are limited by the perspective of the writer. This book is split into 7 essays, and 3 of those essays are entirely or almost entirely just imagery. And I suppose the essay is essentially you putting together your own thoughts on viewing these juxtaposed images. Some of those juxtapositions will definitely conjure the exact same thoughts for a great many people, but I think some of them felt like I wasn't sure what links I was supposed to make, and I think in those instances it's interesting to linger a little longer and not force yourself to make connections, but try to see what the author is trying to say. Is it a connection made based on everything you've seen before? Is it a connection made based on another context that the book is written in that would be much more obvious in that time and isn't so much now? Is it something that has new layered meaning since then? Probably. So I found those really interesting, and they felt a little bit like when you are just thrust into a gallery that you don't really know that much about any of the pieces, and you are making these links, whether you are consciously trying to do that or not. So that was an interesting exercise included in that, and especially because those essays are kind of alternated with the text essays. So you've sort of read through a way of seeing, and then you're looking at all of these images, and then you're bringing some of that stuff that you've just read, I suppose, to this set of apparently random but obviously selected imagery. So that process was really interesting to me, but I could also see how that can feel irritating maybe if you're not someone who's kind of up for playing that game. The first essay I found initially a little bit hard to get into, and then once it kind of got rolling, I really got into it. It went from being an art history lesson to being much more intertwined with politics, because in that first essay we're looking at how culturally, societally, the way that we view art has changed based on the context that we were able to encounter it. So we've gone from having to go somewhere to see one piece of art that was only in one place, to any artwork being able to be reproduced a million times on a million different surfaces, and used for a million different uses. And now we're looking at artwork being stolen by computer systems and mashed together to create the kind of AI slop that we're seeing all over the internet now, to confuse and deceive and exploit and all of these other things. Yes, I have a bias, and I feel that there would be a lot more to add to that essay today, obviously. way more than they probably envisioned at the time. That first essay looks at how changing the context of an artwork can irrevocably change its authority with people and definitely change its meaning. It also looks at how we focus a lot less on the meaning of paintings these days than we do on authenticating its physicality. So we have a lot of value placed on having an original Renoir or an original Van Gogh or an original Da Vinci or something. And that is more important than why was this painting made? Who was it made for? What was it trying to say or do? Like, what was the point of this thing? Who are the people in it? How are they represented? All of those things. We're focusing more now on who can authenticate it being an original piece, and that originality is where we place our value these days, on its rarity as an original. And I suppose that makes sense in the world of reproductions the way that we have now. That made me think about how in December or November of last year, I went with my friends to see the finalists for the Turner Prize, and we all had slightly different responses to each of the artists' work, and we had different rankings of favorites, and we discussed this, and it was the first time that I really realized that I don't really put that much importance on originality in a piece of artwork as what makes it really interesting to me or what makes it really appealing to me. That is a thing that I find interesting and can be very special and so on. But I realized in that exhibition that the piece that moved me the most was the one that I felt was most expertly communicating its meaning. So to me, that authenticity of message is probably higher in my rankings of importance than just something being new. Whereas I have friends who place more importance on a new idea rather than something executed very well. So that is a whole discussion unto itself, but this first essay did bring that up for me again when it was looking at authenticity and value and all of those things, and that sort of rarity piece. Another thing that first essay brings up is how disconnected everyday people are from the art world, and the higher your education, the more connected you are likely to be to the art world. And when I say the art world, I mean like the establishment art world. So the higher your education level, the more likely you will have gone to art galleries and museums and things, and the less likely you are to be intimidated by those spaces. There was a bit in here where they asked different people like what they kind of associated these spaces with, and the less formal education people had, they would say things like a library or a church, and there's this idea of like sanctity, but also I think there's an idea of like this wasn't explicitly said, I don't think, but for me, equating an art gallery or a museum to those kinds of places also has a sense of things that you should or shouldn't be doing. Like when you're in the library, you can get shushed because you're being too loud, or when you're in the church, there are certain things that you should or shouldn't do, or you shouldn't touch certain things, or that kind of way where it's not all accessible to you. Whereas the higher the level of formal education, more likely people were to associate spaces like museums and art galleries with places like lecture halls and libraries as well. But like I got a sense that it was more in an academic but casual sort of interaction, and less of an intimidated kind of interaction, and that I found really sad, especially in the UK, where I think most galleries and museums are free, like freely accessible to anyone. That's a real shame, because there isn't a money barrier there, and it means that these spaces no longer have a financial barrier of entry, and I would hope that they are entered into and used as a place that anyone can just kind of go and observe and have these thoughts and have opinions on whether they like or dislike certain things, and engage with other people's thoughts in that way. But there's clearly still some sort of psychological barrier that people are having that I don't necessarily understand or connect with. I can come up with ideas as to why that is, but I don't personally feel that way, and it's just kind of sad that other people do feel that way, even though I get it, but I don't get it, you know? And I do recognize, as is kind of stated in this book, that some of that mystifying of the art world is intentional, it's manufactured, and the idea is that by cutting off this part of history, because basically when you have art from any past time and any current time as well, like it is inextricably linked with politics, but also art from the past says a lot about history and context of previous times. Like it carries a lot of history with it. It carries a lot of social meaning with it. And if you are disconnecting whole groups of people from it, you're disconnecting whole groups of people from whole sections of history. And so with that in mind, the essay kind of rounds off talking about how doing that is taking away certain freedoms of people because you are disconnecting them from history, from information that would be able to arm them with a certain type of class consciousness, I suppose, and certain ideas about dynamics that art can and has highlighted in the past. At least that's the sense that I got from it. I do wish I had been making notes more often through this, but I was largely reading it just like before bed, and so I didn't really feel like getting out my note-making tools or anything like that, but I kind of wish I had made notes along the way, because a lot of the essays did touch on quite a lot of things in a relatively short period of time. The essay that I think I was the least satisfied with, maybe, at least initially, and somewhat on the whole, was the one that was looking at women in art and how they're represented in art. I felt like, overall, I feel like the style of this book is written in a way that I don't often see these days, where an opinion is asserted with a lot of authority, and although they make an effort to support what they're saying, it doesn't, like there are certain things where you're inclined to say, but is that really true? And I don't know if they make that much effort to sort of be airtight in their in their assertion. They just kind of say the thing and then that's true, and you just have to go along with it. And that's kind of interesting, and in one way it kind of does pull you along through the argument, and you have to get all the way through the argument, and you're not like nitpicking on every little thing along the way. I mean, you could do, but like the idea is, I think you just kind of flow through it, and then you assess at the end, sort of, when reflecting. Or at least that was my inclination, I suppose. But it did make me, throughout the whole essay, particularly the one on women that was written by a man, feel a little like I was holding the content at a distance. And I think especially having read and been very impressed by the book Women in the Picture by Catherine McCormack, that really does a fantastic job of breaking down the representation of women in the arts and looking at it in an intersectional way, looking at different cultures and ethnicities and ability, women with chronic illness and how they're depicting themselves, all the various ways that women have been represented. But I think Catherine McCormack does a really good job of acknowledging where her lane is and knowing not to overstep her boundary and overstep what she's able to speak to. Then we have an essay that looks at oil painting and how that changed our view of things hugely in the West, and how the amount of realism we were able to get from that, it shifts the way that we interact with painting. The things that medium is or isn't able to do is really interesting in the context of how it's being used. And then we see later on that same tradition of the oil painting, which is implied to be usurped by the camera. We see how that tradition continues on through the era of the camera, through the era of particularly, they say, cheap color photography. We see all of these elements playing out most strongly in our everyday lives in advertisements. And I think that's interesting because if we're coming from a place where people are not engaging with the art world, it's interesting to see how much authority the art world still has in that space of our everyday lives through the use of ads, which are a tool of capitalism that is spelled out in the book as well. And all of these crossover things of how we're using art throughout this whole book, just I valued, I really appreciated how they really brought home that connection between art and politics, and how it's just so enmeshed. You cannot, you can't disentangle those things from just who is able to do it, who is represented, who, what is being, what ideas are being explored, what ideas are like praised, and then like the value we derive from things. Is it from the meaning or the value as capitalism has decided there is value? Like all of these things are all political and it's all art. And I feel like there has been a lot done to try to convince people that art is something separate from politics. And I think there's a lot done in a lot of different areas. Like, you know, politics is every aspect of our lives, blah, blah, blah. And so there's a lot that happens. There's a lot that goes into trying to separate that idea from people, where it's like, oh, I just want to live my life and not have to think about politics, blah, blah, blah. But like, that's not possible. I mean, that's a privilege to be able to think that way, but also, you know, that's not possible. All of those ideas are nothing new for me to bring up, but I just really appreciated that this book is really driving home that idea that they are enmeshed, and there really is no way to separate those two from that relationship. There are more things that I think I could say about this and my experience with reading it, but ultimately I want to acknowledge that I do think that it deserves its place in the art criticism canon. But I will say that I think the essay in here about women and their representation in the art world and so on could be entirely replaced with Catherine McCormack's book, Women in the Picture. And I suspect that some of the other ideas in here, or maybe entire essays, could be replaced with more contemporary books that have perhaps built on and thoroughly expanded on some of these ideas now. But I feel like this is a great jumping off point for some of those philosophical discussions about art and its many uses, and the way that we see it in our world today, and perhaps even help us to think about how we saw it in the past and will see it in the future. This has obviously made me very curious about watching the show, which I'm guessing this book is from the 70s. I think the show would have been around the same time. So I am very curious about that, and I'll check that out. But now I'm on to my next book, which I don't know what that is yet, but I will be continuing my challenge of reading at least 6 books on art criticism and creativity and craft and so on and so forth throughout this year. I think that's all I have for now, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.